All right, welcome to the next in the 67 steps, 67 guidelines, rules, frameworks, principles to get you whatever it is you want out of life. Hopefully you want the good life, because that's what we're talking about. So today we are on what I call Warren Buffett's book a day diet and making war with a multitude of counselors. Why billionaires read a lot. So, we've hinted around this and talked a little bit. This is actually what my TED Talk is about. It's about why I read a book a day. So the way this all came about in terms of books, like I said, now I think me and Oprah have the biggest book clubs in the world. That's not because I want to brag. There was many years that I read like this and I never told anybody. The only reason I talk about it now is because it seems like people hearing this message get some value for their life. So, at the end of the day, I really believe, like John Wooden says, we're in a competition with ourselves. So for me, as I began to read, began to travel the world, as we've talked about before in one of the other 67 steps, rich friends, poor friends. I talked about that. If you've listened to that, where I say, my rich friends have some consistent things they all seem to do, even the rich friends that don't know each other. And my poor friends seem to have consistent things. I talked about how poor friends always seem to have opinions on stuff that they couldn't possibly have any knowledge about. Whereas my rich friends are always kind of like, yeah, I don't know, I'm asking, I'm mentoring, I'm looking for answers. And one of those areas that I specifically see this over and over is in the volume of books that they read. So I read an article many years ago where they asked Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, at that time the two richest men in the world, if they could have one superpower, what would it be? And I found it interesting that they were both answered with the exact same answer, which was they would be the fastest readers in the world. Again, I look for patterns, as you've learned before. Whenever you notice people of a certain level of success consistently doing things, this is going back to the most fundamental part of 67 steps, which are what? Observing. Like Darwin, blue-footed booby bird, we talked about this. It's not the smartest or the strongest, it's the most adaptable. So you have to be able to adapt, and one of the ways you adapt is by observing, looking at what people do. One of those things, Jim Rohn used to say, the great life coach, the guy who coached Tony Robbins and got Tony Robbins started. If you listen to some of his old YouTubes, which I highly recommend, Jim Rohn used to say stuff like, you know what the difference between a rich man's house and a poor man's house is? A rich man's house always has a library. Almost always. And as I've done surveys anecdotally and informally of the top, the most influential people throughout history, whether it be Alexander the Great. We talked about Alexander the Great before. Interesting if you read, I see this book here by the Spear on my bookshelf. If you haven't read that, it's on my recommended list. And fascinating thing just pops up as I'm reading the biography of Alexander the Great. He used to travel with a library or have books sent to him. So even then, thousands of years ago, impact people seem to be correlated with books. Richest people of our time, books. Guys like Richard Branson, if you read Screw It, Let's Do It, he was dyslexic, but he was like, I taught myself numbers and reading things because I knew to be successful, I had to overcome that natural handicap that I had, this dyslexia. He didn't use it as a crutch. He just saw it as an obstacle to go over. We're going to talk about that in one of the other 67 steps. So for you, if I was here in person with you, I guarantee you have some specific roadblocks, mental blocks when it comes to books. Now, what do most humans do when they reach a mental block? They invent reasons why they can't do it. They invent reasons why it's not important. I once read an article about how in countries where there's huge disparity between the rich and the poor, like India, how the rich and the poor keep a peace. It's by the poor making up reasons that they're not rich. So they'll say things like the rich person stole the money, they inherited, they got lucky. And that's a coping mechanism to cope with the inequalities that we find in distribution of resources throughout the world. So when it comes to me asking you, what's holding you back from reading? My best guess, if you're not careful, is your mind is going to come up with some crazy, inaccurate reasons why you don't. It's going to come up with things like books aren't that important. It's not about being book smart. It's about being street smart. Or it's not about what's in your head. It's about what you do. Or, oh, if you read so many hours, you're not going to be able to execute and you're always going to be reading. I hear people say that. And I'm like, really? Do you think that's true? Do you think there's many people that look back on their life and go, you know, I just spent too many years downloading the thoughts, the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience of the most intelligent people throughout history, and this has caused me problems? The answer is probably not many people have ever said that. But I know what I've said to myself, and you probably said it, man, I wish somebody had told me this 20 years ago. I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago. Yeah, that's a common refrain that we all have. And the simplest way to avoid that, let me read you this fascinating book. I keep this quote on my book. It's by Richard Dawkins. He talks about, in the book The Selfish Gene, 1976, he wrote this book. One of the most influential books in history. Now listen to what he says here, because this is fairly mind-blowing. He says, why the human mind is wired the way it is. So let me just find this. I like to keep these notes. Okay, so on chapter 4, he talks about, let's see if I can find it. Okay. Let me actually find it here. It's at a different place. Trial. He's talking about trial and error. All right. So imagine okay, here we go. The gene machine. It's on chapter 4. No amount sorry. Excuse me as I wait here. All right. Survival machines that can simulate the future are one jump ahead of survival machines who can only learn on the basis of overt trial and error. Now, I oftentimes don't ask people to do this, but I want to ask you to literally write down this quote. If you have the book, I think it's on chapter 4. So listen to this again. Write this down. Pause this, rewind it, and go back and write this down. Survival machines, he's talking about us humans, that can simulate the future are one jump ahead of survival machines who can only learn on the basis of overt trial and error. Now, why is that? Well, he says, the trouble with overt trial is that it takes time and energy. The trouble with overt error is that it is often fatal. Simulation is both safer and faster. One more time. Sounds like I'm harping on this. I am. Survival machines that can simulate the future are one jump ahead of survival machines who can only learn on the basis of overt trial and error. The trouble with overt trial is that it takes time and energy. The trouble with overt error is that it is often fatal. Simulation is both safer and faster. The evolution of the capacity to simulate seems to have culminated in subjective consciousness. He is saying, you might not fully agree with his worldview, but what he is saying is our brain is what it is so that we no longer had to learn by overt trial and error, because overt trial and error takes time that we don't have a lot of as humans, and it takes energy, which is also finite. You will run out of energy. You know, the average person doing something, anything, starting a business after 3 failures will, guess what? Quit, because their energy is finite. And so certain error, in addition, is fatal. Fatal for your business, fatal for your health, fatal for your hopes, fatal for your dreams. I was reading the story of Evel Knievel, a biography of him, crazy guy. But you know the saying that Nietzsche said, the philosopher, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger? Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Evel Knievel did a stunt where he was going to jump over, 12 cars, and he knew that he had to get to 70 miles an hour, but there was some gravel, so his speedometer was showing he was going 70 miles an hour because the wheels were spinning a little faster than he was actually going. And guess what? He hit that ramp, flew, the back wheel caught the last car, and he flipped and hurt himself very badly. Broke his knee, shattered his arm, and they said he was 27 years old, I think. His health never quite recovered till the end of his life. I think he died in his 60s of like emphysema or some pulmonary thing, something non-spectacular. But point being, because Evel Knievel did not simulate what would happen with the gravel flying that car, he learned by, guess what, overt trial and error. I think he was in the hospital for 3 months. It was expensive. He couldn't do his livelihood, which was racing cars. It was almost fatal in that his health was severely degraded, not only for that month or that year, but they say for the rest of his life. So in the same way, whatever your dream is, whether it be to lose weight, make $1 million business, find love, find fulfillment. If your plan is like my friend, I'll never forget. He's a great guy, childhood friend, but the worst guy with women maybe I've ever met. And literally for years, like a decade, never got a second date from any girl he went out with. And he was here in Hollywood, and we were driving up the hill to my house, and I looked at him. He was telling me, lamenting his last horrible date, and I was like, man, you know what? Why don't you read a book on dating, or why don't you ask somebody, get a coach, man? And I'll never forget what he said to me. And at least he was honest about it, because most people are dishonest. He looked at me and he said, you know, Ty, I need to learn by my own experience. I need to learn by trial and error. I need to make my own mistakes. And instantly what came into my mind was what Warren Buffett says. We all learn by mistakes, but it's a heck of a lot easier to learn through other people's mistakes. Sure, you need mistakes, but there's no rule that says they have to be your mistakes. So going back to this, why am I suggesting you read a book a day? What is this Evel Knievel and Selfish Gene and my friend who can't get a date? What does that have to do with you? Simple. Books are the easiest way to simulate outcomes. For example, if you read, let's say, Sam Walton's book, I saw it here somewhere, Made in America, here it is. So you can read the story of a man and you could simulate his business experience, the successes, the failures. You know, when he was back in 1945, he started his first store before Walmart. A few years into it, he hadn't read the contract of his lease very well. And all those 2 years of hard work where he had grown this business from nothing, revived this store, was making hundreds of thousands of dollars back in the 40s, I think, in gross sales. It was all taken away from him because he hadn't learned how to read a contract. And you and I, instead of us having to learn the hard way, what happens when you don't read a contract, we can just read Sam Walton's book for $5, invest 1 hour of our time, or 2 hours if you're a slower reader. It's not a very complicated book to read. He wrote it on his deathbed. He made $160 billion, $160,000 million. And you and I, for $5 and a few hours, can simulate what he did, both good, and learn to not simulate the bad, and shave years, dollars, dollars lost, heartaches avoided, shave all those off of our life. And that, according to Richard Dawkins, that is what makes us uniquely human. Only we humans can learn beyond instinct. You see it, a dolphin or a dog, they're pre-programmed. And Dawkins, the biologist, talks about that. He said, a dog is pre-programmed with a set of instincts. It's not very good at simulating, adapting, and learning from its environment. It's, to a certain extent, it's adaptable. But, humans go to deserts and turn them into irrigated paradise. Humans go to the most inhospitable places in the world and make them. Humans go to the moon. There's no animal that has that capacity. We have that capacity. And it's because we were built with the ability to learn. There's another part in this book. Let's see if I can find it. So it says, I'll try to find it here. Anyway, it's talking about learning, why we have learning. And it's so that we can be dropped into any environment, whether it be a new business you're launching, whether it be a family situation, you have a financial situation, and you have the ability to not overcome it, as most people say. You know, there's this zeitgeist in the world that you can just, through hard work, positive thinking, get through it. No, my friend. We know this better now. It's through accurate simulation of outcomes without having to go through it that you're going to get whatever you want. And the simplest way to do that, by far, I mean, I'm all for in-person mentors. Okay, I'm totally for that. Those of you who know me, I've had 5 at least, and I've had more over the years. But man, this guy, if you're learning business, Sam Walton, he's no longer alive. There is no in-person option. This guy here, All Quiet on the Western Front, talks about the repercussions of war, too much conflict. Eric Remarque, he's not here. Managing oneself. Peter Drucker, he died, I think, in the late 90s. Gary Keller, he's alive, but he's pretty hard to reach. Michael Jordan, right here, this book. Sure, he's alive, but he's good luck trying to get an interview with Michael Jordan, but you can read a book about him. You can watch YouTube videos. So I want you to double down on your ability and the pace with which you simulate the future, simulate mistakes, successes, and go through this self-learning acceleration, if you will. So, you know, the other thing that I talk about, what we're talking about today, is not just the book a day diet, but also making war with the multitude of counselors. You know, I'm reading the Hillary Clinton book, or I just read Hard Choices. You may not agree with her politics. I don't even read these books. I'm not very political, and the political part of that book is not important to me. I'm pretty non-political, but what's fascinating is the insight into how presidents, not only of the United States, but high-ranking officials everywhere, they don't operate alone. The only people I know that operate alone are my poor friends. Everybody else, my richest business partner, the people that I know that are, you know, doing billions of dollars worth of transactions in a lifetime, they have accountants, lawyers, CPAs, CFOs, a board of advisors, mentors, paid consultants. In fact, they're following this adage, make war with a multitude of counselors. That's an ancient saying from 4,000 years ago. Make war with a multitude of counselors. In your life, those areas where you have a cabinet, like the president has, those are going to be the best, strongest areas of your life. Those areas you're going at it solo, you're forgetting. It's what I call subconscious arrogance. In a world of 7 billion people, you will not be able to be a specialist in everything. You know, if any of us here broke our legs today, fell down the stairs, we would not be like, hey, I read a book once on, you know, bandaging up your wounds, so I'm going to just follow along here. You wouldn't do that. None of us, hopefully, are that foolish. We would make war with a multitude of counselors. We'd go, broken arm, go to the hospital, go to the emergency room. A nurse would do this. Maybe 1 or 2 doctors would look at it if it's serious. And somebody who's done this 100 times would fix you on up. And your outcome would be pretty known. You'd be almost simulating the future, which is people get casts on their arm or their leg when it's broken, when they use experts, making war with a multitude of wise counselors, because that saying presupposes that you're using wise counselors. Some people use counselors, anybody. They just like, hey, I got a broken leg. You walking down the street, you want to help me? No. You go straight to counselors. But to the extent you do that, again, the future becomes more secure. And remember, you and I as humans daily are dealing with immense amounts of risk. You know, fear is there for good reason. Humans are dominated by fear primarily, in my experience. And obviously some interest in reward too is a very strong reward. I mean, very strong aim of all of us. But fear is an overriding, and rightfully so. You know, as they say, in our progression as humans, the person who feared 99 false alarms is better than one death, right? So that's why humans are generally anxious and skittish. That's why birds, when they're walking and you're not going to hurt them, they'll fly away if you get within 10 feet of them. Why? Because they've learned better to be a little bit overly fearful than accidentally 1 out of 100 times you get caught as the prey. So in the same way, we're pretty programmed to be fear-based, and to a certain extent, to the extent that you use it progressively or to progress your movement towards a good life, I think there's nothing wrong with fear. When it becomes paralyzing, you're in trouble. So if you agree with me that at any moment a lot of bad can happen to us, whether it's natural disaster, getting hit by a car, bankruptcy, recession in the economy, business partner steal from you, wife or husband cheat on you, gaining weight, cancer, whatever it is, to the extent that we can diminish these risks, the odds of us living the good life are going to go up. And once again, each of those areas, let's take them one by one. Health. Best thing you can do is read a book a day. And at least 25% of the books you read, in my opinion, should be on physical health, because that's the first pillar of the good life. Man, I've learned so much. And I'm not in perfect health, but I'm pretty healthy, and those people in my family are healthy. And you learn there's so many breakthroughs, whether it be the books I'm reading, Dr. Sharon Mollum on epigenetics and what we understand about genes, Wheat Belly about the effects of modern hybridized wheat, or Fast Food Nation, where you truly get insight into where your fast food, if you eat fast food, is coming from. Arnold Schwarzenegger books on working out. I mean, over and over, I can go on and on about all these health issues that can be so easily addressed, that without you having to put your body through the pain and tribulation of being unhealthy, you can just learn it. You can be like, okay, I did a book, 50 Secrets of the Longest Living People in the World. Well, it seems that all these people groups around the world have one thing in common. They don't eat processed food. Some of them eat pasta, some of them eat fish, some of them eat. So you can just simulate the future and go, okay, you want to live long? Probably cutting processed food, pretty simple. Now again, causation, correlation, a little bit complicated to know, but that's probably a pretty good bet. There's a lot of science that you can read right back it up. So if you can increase your quote unquote diet of books about physical health, you will see a massive change in your body. It might not happen today, it might not happen tomorrow, but it will happen if you give it 18 months and you put into effect, you use books not just to acquire knowledge, but as the Dalai Lama says in Beyond Religion, you have level 1, which is just hearing or reading. Level 2 is pondering, and level 3 is in making it instinctual. If you give it some time, these things will begin to kick in and become instinctual for you physically, just through books. I once had, there was a group of guys that I was coaching this group, and I said, I'll give you guys $10,000 if any of you reads a book a day for 30 days off my list, because we'll talk about this later. You can read stupid books that don't help you at all. So I said, off an approved list that I give you, and after 30 days, you look me in the eyes and say, Ty, this has not been worth the time. No one ever tried to collect on that debt. They all tried it, and in good faith, they were all like, usually within 1 week, they're like, this is the most surreal experience I've ever had. Wow, what is going on? So on this 67 steps, I'm going to talk a teeny bit on the technique to increase your book a day, your speed, but I've got some other videos you'll get access to as bonuses and things. Some I give away for free, but some of the more advanced ones that I'm doing are just available to people like you in the program. So if these group of guys all tried it for 30 days and not one of them tried to collect on $10,000, take my word on, this is the best experiment you will ever do in your life, seriously. And I've done it. It's funny. People have worked for me for years, but I've never really been heavy-handed and been like, you have to do the book of the day. The ones who do, it just blows their mind. So now I've laid the background. Let's talk about some practicality. Couple pitfalls you must avoid, couple rules you must follow. One, there's 130 million books written published at one point in the world. It's too many. At best, my goal is to die having read 10,000 books. That's hard. I don't know if I will. You never know, like I talk about, you never know your true age. I don't know when I'll die, but I'm going to work on that goal, right? Set your goals to the stars, and even if you only get halfway, you still made it pretty far in outer space. So if I have 130 million to select from, we talked about the misweighting bias. That's another one of the 67 steps. You got to major in the majors and minor in the minors. I want to read in order. Tomorrow's uncertain. I better get through the best books first. So if you go to on the site here, there's a book link on the site. I would recommend you read in that general order those specific books. If there's a few there you want to skip or add in, but just try. Joel Salatin used to tell me when I did an apprenticeship with him, a mentorship with him for 2.5 years on his farm in Virginia. He said, Ty, for the first year, just try things my way. If it doesn't work well, then we'll adjust it over time, but give me the benefit of the doubt. So I've been reading for a while. Give me the benefit of the doubt that these are very effective books. So number one, you must read the right books. And here's what the temptation. You're going to be down at Barnes & Noble. You're going to be on Amazon, and some shiny, flashy covered book is going to be like with the best title. Remember, these publishers now are such good copywriters that they do the best titles, and you get sucked in. Don't be the sucker. Remember, if you're in a room and you don't know who the sucker is, you're the sucker. Never be the sucker. Don't be driven by consumer advertising, ever. If anything, you be the advertiser, not the one who's advertised to. So do not judge books by cover, that old cliche. Do not judge by the catchiness of the site. I like to go by tried and true and who's the author. What credibility? Like, Sam Walton brings a lot of credibility to a business book. He made $160 billion. It's hard to argue with that. So, number one, read in proper priority order. Number two, for your first round and your first kind of attempt at this accelerating your reading, don't focus too much on speed reading. Everyone asks me, Ty, are you going to teach me how to speed reading? I'm like, no. What I want you to do, instead of speed reading, is replace the metaphor of gold miner. I want you to just set a time, just like a gold miner would be like, you know what? I'm going to go to this river. I'm going to start at 8 in the morning. I'm going to go till 10. Whatever I find, I find. If not, I head back. That's what I want you to start doing. So you take a book like this, and you say, I'm going to book a day pace. So I got a day, however much time you have in that day. Maybe you have an hour while you take a nap. That's what I recommend. You pull up this book and you go, I'm going to skim through it, look for chapters, I like to read the table of contents, give me a little bit of understanding what the book's about, flip around, look for a chapter that's relevant, and then I wrote my notes on the back here as I go. That kind of helps me. You may not need that as much unless you start your own book club, but you kind of come back here, find a few things, and if you find one thing, one piece of gold, that's enough. I like to even write in the books. I put little stars by the most important thing. Man, look for the gold, and then just put that book back on your bookshelf. If you're buying the right books, you don't have to have this feeling that I have to finish this whole book before I move on. Who made up that rule? Where's the rule that says you have to read a book from start to finish? Of course you're going to miss something. People go, well, Ty, I'll miss something in the book. But I'm like, well, here's the fallacy of your logic. Your logic is flawed because sure, you'll miss something reading this book, but opportunity cost says if you're too long reading this one, you're missing out on another book you could be reading. So that's a moot point because they negate each other. B, you have flawed logic because you're assuming you can't come back to this book later. If you had a friendship, if you and I met, first time we might just say hello, a short interaction. Second time we might have a drink. Next time we might go to dinner. Next time we might all go, on a trip together. It's okay to increase over time the depth and the relationship you have with key books. This one is one I'll read hopefully once a year for the rest of my life. He has that much credibility. He did something maybe nobody's ever done in history. terms of the business success he had. This book, All Quiet on the Western Front, it's one of my favorite books. I read it, once every year or two. So I know if I skip a part one year, I'll catch it the next. Or if I have a particular, thought, what did that book say? I can go back to it. So first is set your time. Second, see yourself as a gold miner. Third, don't be afraid, like Gary Keller says in the book right here. Embrace the chaos, a little bit of chaos of feeling like I'm missing. It's okay, because you're not missing, because you're going to go on to something else great. And if you do this, okay, you will be surprised. A guy just wrote me the other day. I wish I had his exact email, but he's like, I've been fighting this concept high, for a year listening to you say it. Oh, I don't believe it. And he said, man, it worked. I just took one thing like a gold miner and I moved on to another book. And even though I thought I was missing, I gained it in the next book by learning more in the next book. See, you'll gain it in the next one. So, next thing, whatever number 4 or 5. As you increase and get closer and closer to book a day diet, I just want you to start slowly. So right now the average person in America is reading about one book every month at most. So you're following the other rules, you're reading the right book. I want you to try to get that right away to once a week. That means if you're in this program 67 days, that's roughly a 10-week program. I'd like you to get through 10 books. You can use the books I'm recommending, even if you don't finish them all. Okay? Now, so that's the next point. The next point is absolutely important. The schedule with which you read. I actually do not read one book at a time completely from start to finish in a day. I read the equivalent of one book a day. I mean, sometimes I read a book a day. The other Saturday, I read 5 books in one day. But what I like to do is in the morning, have a book that is a classic, more than 50 years old. So a book that's, for example, this book, All Quiet on the Western Front. Something that stood the test of time. Freud, Civilization is Discontent. A book by Aristotle, Socrates, Shakespeare, Locke, Descartes, Darwin, whoever, Schopenhauer, whatever great thinker whose words have stood the test of time. And I like to do that over breakfast. Just like you wake up and you take a shower to clean off all the dirt. Well, our minds accumulate over 2,000 ads on average per day. That's all consumer selling you, making you the sucker messages. So I like to just start my day with a great thinker. Will Durant is one of the best. Lessons of History. You can read that book over and over. It's on my book list. It's a real cheap book to get. Charlie Munger. It's not quite 50-year-old book, but I let that one slide in. And then as you read that, it just begins to cleanse your mind. It can be 5 minutes a day. I recommend you do it over breakfast. 2 minutes, 3 minutes while you're brushing your teeth in the morning, or you're shaving. Just one great thought from a great thinker who stood the test of time. Not some, New York Times bestseller, something old. Then at one point during the day, I recommend you take a nap every day. Not I don't, but we know this makes people a lot healthier. So people struggle. I was reading that book, The Lessons or The Story of the Human Body by Lieberman, the Harvard professor, and he talks about how we oftentimes have trouble sleeping because he said we're not evolved, our brain didn't get wired to lay there in quietness till we fall asleep. He said never in history have humans fallen asleep like that. So have a little activity going. Lay on the couch if you're at home or work. Learn to fall asleep by just reading a how-to book. So in the beginning, sometime around, they say the best time is 6 hours after you woke up. So if you wake up around 7 or 8, take a nap around 12 or 1, do it by starting. I set the timer for me for about 35 minutes. Then I'll read for about 20 and fall asleep for 10 or 15, power nap, just enough that I don't feel groggy. You can test it for yourself. Everyone's going to be different. Ben Greenfield, a guy who mentors me about physical health, he says, Ty, I like a 1 or 2 hour nap a day. So do whatever is best for you, okay? But during that time, fit in a how-to book. Now, the definition of a how-to book for me is a book relevant to the industry business-wise or health-wise. Really anything related to the good life, but some kind of how-to feel to it. I often read my business books then. Sometimes I read a health book, like I said, Lessons of History, or Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss on the physical body, Fast Food Nation I read recently. You can read in the love category, read some Dr. David Buss, the book Social by Matt Lieberman, the Harvard guy. You can read Helen Fisher, Dr. Helen Fisher, Dr. Martina Adshade. I have a whole bunch of books related to social and love. And then fulfillment, read big picture stuff. Read stuff, Mother Teresa, read Martin Seligman, Part Positive Psychology, Jonathan Haidt, Happiness Hypothesis. There's all these things. So those are my how-to. That's my core reading. It's done before I sleep, 20, 30 minutes a day. It really helps you fall asleep. It creates a nice routine, breaks it up so you're not, it's hard to nap when you're like, I gotta fall asleep. When you just do it naturally. And that way, there's some days that I don't fall asleep, but I don't feel bad because I got something done. I was reading, okay? Then when it comes to the next category, which is nighttime, okay? I said I read 3 books. In the morning, I'm reading these 50-year-old books, the best of the best thinkers. During the day, during a nap time or whatever, middle of the day, I'm reading some how-to thing related to the good life, the 4 pillars, health, wealth, love, happiness. Then at night, I recommend, because you don't want to read too much of a how-to book. It'll get your mind racing. It's okay for a nap, but it's not as good for a full night's rest. Read a biography. So biographies give you courage. And if you need anything to stand out with the crowd in the modern world, you're going to need courage. And humans learn by osmosis. So have this rub off on you. And courage is the best way to biographies of courageous people. So sometimes, here's one, Total Recall. Even this one on Jeff Bezos. I read one of the great ones, Kon-Tiki. The story of these guys that built a raft to prove it could be done and floated across the Pacific Ocean in a raft. Mind-blowing. Read that story. They chopped down the wood, these balsa trees, and headhunters came after them in South America, and they put this boat together. I also have the movie on my recommended movies, the recent movie that came out. It's about Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian explorer. So picking up books of just courage, you learn a lot. Courage is transmitted by rubbing off on you. You can't close your eyes and grit your teeth and clench your fists and get it. It's going to come through osmosis, and that really helps. I've never had problems sleeping, and I've always gone to bed reading. So if you like fiction, I would say that nighttime is a good time to do some fiction too. Okay. Only time I've had trouble with this is I once in a while read a Stephen King book, and then I have horrible dreams, so I cut off any kind of horror thing at night. I'm not a big horror guy. Don't see the end game there, but if you like it, experiment. Use that at nighttime. Notice, go easy on the fiction. Now, some people would disagree with me. There are some people that say they learn a lot from fiction, but I think it depends on the fiction. Like James Michener, I have some of his books. That is historical fiction. If you really like fiction, try some James Michener's book. Try, Chesapeake. Try Hawaii. Try Alaska. You learn about history. You learn life lessons, but it's kind of fictionalized enough to keep it really entertaining. He won a couple Pulitzer Prize winners. He's not an amateur writer. He's amazing. Or All Quiet on the Western Front, which in a sense is fiction / not fiction. It's based on a true story. So, go easy on the fiction in my experience. I'm not sure the value you get from some of these, 50 Shades of Grey, blah, 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 whatever books are out there, Again, 130 million books. Be wise. Time is finite. So, that's the pace. Now, of course, it varies, okay? There's sometimes I'm reading, like sometimes on a Saturday when you have some time off. Take 2 hours and just plow through books. Embrace the chaos of missing. Don't necessarily try to speed read. But let me show you some elementary speed reading here. And I've got some other videos. What I like to do, let's say this book, The One Thing here by Gary Keller. What I recommend you do is start by reading the jacket, the cover, the back, read about the author, okay? So I like to do 3 passes. You notice I have a lot of 3s. So you kind of come through here, you read the back. It's like you want fewer distractions, you want more, okay. I like to read the jacket. Gary Keller is chairman of board and co-founder Keller Williams. Sold 1.4 million people. Okay, has a website. He has some little notes here. If you chase 2 rabbits, you will not catch either one. A Russian proverb. Then this first pass, I'm also going through the table of contents. Okay, he's going to talk about the lies, the truth, extraordinary results. Okay, he has a short one here. So then, that's my first pass. And sometimes I'll flip through it just real fast, just as fast as could be. Just, okay, yep, there we go. Okay. I like to spend, 5 minutes on the first pass. Then the second pass is just a little bit more in depth. I look for one chapter that kind of stands out. Which chapter? I spend about 10, 15 minutes doing this. For you, it might be a little longer, but notice I'm progressively taking a little more time and progressively reading and focusing down a little bit more. And then that third pass, I might literally, on that third pass, just read one chapter. And then I'm done. Break the rules. Who says, Arnold Schwarzenegger has a great talk that he gave. It's on YouTube, and it's how he was successful. And he's like, break the rules. He said, not the law, but break the rules. Jeff Bezos, they talk about him, and said the great thing of him, the only rules he followed and never tried to break were the laws of physics. He couldn't change those, but they said everything else was up for grabs. So remember, just because everyone else out there, the masses of people, buy one book, get stuck in it over and over, even if it's not a good book, they feel somehow obligated to the author, even though the author's not there in person and it doesn't care. You already won. You paid him the money. He won. He didn't care. He could use it for, firewood. Now, which brings me to an interesting point. There is a cognitive bias that I think we all have, that books probably are hardwired into our brain to be like as in a human speaking to us. So you got to avoid that tendency of kind of feeling rude. And the easiest way to get around that is remembering that the average book only has 1 or 2 pieces of gold, especially modern books that haven't stood the test of time. Some of the classic books you're going to have to read slower, like Shakespeare and so on. But most of these how-to books, they have 1 or 2 good concepts. But then they can't sell a publisher if the author comes in and goes, here's 2 pages. They're not going to sell that book for $20. So they're like, fill it up with stories and anecdotes and all this. So most books are just them trying to prove their point with stories. But you already know it's a lopsided kangaroo court. They're going to, of course, prove their point. So just get to the point. You got the meat of it. It's like the Pareto principle. A lot of people like 80-20. Well, 80% of the book you read gives you only 20% of the knowledge, but 20% of the book, 20% of the pages have 80% of the knowledge. Just be okay with less, especially when it comes to books, because in the end game, it's not going to be less, because if you follow this approach the next day or the next week, or maybe you're at the pace in between every 3 days you're finishing a book, you'll be on to a new one. And then you take those good books that I'm recommending you buy, put them on your shelf. Warren Buffett, this is what he does. He spends 8 hours a day reading. That's what he does. He literally clears his whole schedule so he can just read. And he says, this is why I became, the richest man in the world for many years. And Bill Gates, the same thing. You can go to Bill Gates' blog. He has all these books he's reading. He's a reading machine. Leaders are readers is the old cliche. It's definitely true. And it's not because it's a cumulative number goal. Like, ooh, I read 500. It's the ability to simulate the future without experiencing the trial, the error, the pain, the mistakes, the potential death of making a mistake and not hedging your bets and going and playing with risk. Do not play with risk. I tell people, Mother Nature should be the teacher of last resort. My friend that said never could get a second date, I'm like, dude, like the Dutch say, we are too soon old and too late smart. By the time, I like the analogy or the metaphor that Hawking gives, Stephen Hawking, a physicist. He says, take a jigsaw puzzle or just a puzzle, break up the pieces, so it's all undone, put it in a box, shake the box. He said, do you think if you open it, it's going to magically be put together? How many times did you have to shake the box? Trillions of times. You'd have to shake that box. What books do is instead of you just living a life of randomness, hoping that the next shake of the box, your life is improving, you take control. And we know in positive psychology, some of the best research out there is people who feel out of control are more likely to be depressed. They experience low levels of fulfillment and happiness. So the more you take the reins on your life and control your life, we know statistically, biologically, your happiness is going to go up, which is, of course, number 4 of the pillars of the good life. Health will go up. Wealth will definitely go up. Next time you're reading autobiographies, look at how many people read. It will blow your mind. I would say it's 9 out of 10. There's the occasional person that didn't read much. But literally, 9 out of 10 people read. And people that would surprise you. You know, Carly Rae Jepsen, the pop star with Justin Bieber, and I think she has the second or third most watched music video in the history of the world. I was out with her, and she showed me her Twitter. She's got a Twitter book club. She reads. You wouldn't think it's a rock star, but she's reading. And I have to think there's no coincidence that she's getting to the top when so many musicians, actors, models try to make it, but it's the ones who can simulate the future, according to Dawkins, that win. So my question to you is, as we kind of recap here and end, what is it for you that holds you back from reading? I can guess the biggest problem in the world, and I talked about this before, is the fact that we're forced to read in school horrible books. I remember some of the books I was forced to read. It's just the least entertaining book for any 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old. Luckily, I grew up around a grandma and grandpa that loved reading, and I was already locked in that I loved reading. But man, most of us, maybe you were burned. You were burned in high school, junior high, college, elementary school. You didn't grow up in a background. You're going to have to rewire your brain. There's no easy answer. I don't have an easy answer, but I do have this to say. The rewards are beyond your ability to fathom right now. Just try it. If it doesn't work, you can write me and be like, my life's getting worse the more I read. I've been doing this, and a lot of people follow my stuff. And never once have I gotten a negative complaint. Not even one. And I'm talking about thousands of positive things. The ratio is so high. So maybe you'd be the 1 in a million that finds this ineffective. I doubt it. I doubt it. To get what you want, like I said in my TED Talk, everybody wants the good life, but not everybody's willing to read, because it takes humility, it takes persistence, it takes the acquisition of a new skill, it takes a little money. You have to buy the books, which brings up a question I often get. Physical books versus Kindle, iPhone books, iPad. My thing is, I just think you should get both. I definitely 90% of the time do things physical books. What I like to do is get the physical book. It's something visceral about holding it. I can put it on my shelf and get it. I can write my notes real easily. I think there's a power in that. But I also, the best books I download on my iPhone. There's a little books app. It's called iBooks. Most phones have it, even if you don't have an iPhone. It's a free app, and I buy the books. So often the best books, I own them both physically and electronically. So it does cost a little more that way, but then I can take notes sometimes, or when I'm at a doctor's office or I'm waiting, I'm in a car, someone's driving and we're sitting in traffic, I can read. So I definitely think you should start with physical books, but I don't have a super strong opinion. If you really are a lover of Kindle, just read. The main goal is not the format, it's can you download level 3 Dalai Lama level of knowledge, which is make it instinctual. Remember, we don't want you just reading, we want you to practice. But for this 67 step, I just want you to get down to the nitty gritty of just reading more. Move to once a week if you're at once a month. If you're already at once a week, read one book every 3 days. If you're at one every 3 days, make the jump to one a day. I have a guy that I've coached. I have an inner circle program. Some of you might be in it. For those of you who are wanting to grow a business to $1 million revenue or beyond, I've got a special private. You have to qualify to get in. But I had a guy in there, James, and I remember a while ago, he's one of the first people to just take me at my word and move to one book a day. And it instantly changed everything, specifically his business. Now, I can't promise this would happen, but it doubled his income. I had someone the other day, she said, Ty, you can have this right down. I will do a video saying this has doubled my income. Now, it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just reading. Remember, I said these are an integrated whole. The 67 steps is a whole integrated thing. No linear reductionism. You can't remove them and say, oh, it'll be, if I take 3 of them out, I lose, 3/67ths of the value. No. If you lose 3 of them, you might lose the value of the whole thing because you need all of these tools. I was very specific in when I picked this number 67. So be sure, by the way, you're getting all the way to the end. Don't be like most people trailing off, right? So you go through these 67 steps, and as you're doing it, right, as of today, acceleration of books, you've got to be at least at 1 book a week. You have to be there if you want the good life. It's too competitive of a world with 7 billion people. Everybody wants the good life. Not that it's a zero-sum game, that not everybody in Earth could have it, but I'll tell you, I'm a practical, realistic person. There is some competition in life, as painful as that is. I think there's room for a lot of people to live a good life, but I think it's like the old saying goes, wide is the path that leads to destruction, and many are the people that go on it, and few are the people that go on the narrow path that leads to the kingdom, in the sense of the kingdom is whatever you want out of life. So if this book idea even gives you a 30% optimization, what value would you put on a 30% increase for the rest of your life on the value, the fulfillment, the health, the wealth, the love, and the happiness that you experience? Man, learn to love books. I talk about this, love the grind. If you're at a point right now where books seem painful, it'll go away. It's like lifting weights. It gets easier. It gets easier. Arnold Schwarzenegger, by the time he was working out 6 hours a day, when he came to Santa Monica here in California from Austria, he said lifting weights, he has that famous saying, I think it was Stay Hungry or one of these, where it's like, it's better than an orgasm to feel the burn on my muscles. He'd so rewired his brain, it was the most pleasurable thing he could do, and that's what will eventually happen with books for you. But even though bodybuilding is great, it's one of the most powerful things you can do for your body. Books, you don't just want a 6-pack of your stomach. You don't want just 23-inch biceps. You want a 6-pack of your brain. You see the impact of getting physically fit. Imagine the impact of mental fitness. Most people I know, even people with amazing bodies, you look at their brain, they got a 1-pack. They're overweight. They have a pot belly. Cut it out. Give yourself 67 days to form new patterns, new progression, new momentum, and then give yourself 18 months to really see. Remember, the world has to catch up with you. So don't just think you're going to read and instantly, even though I've seen it more often than not. The closest thing to magic when it comes to success I've ever seen is increased reading. But remember, it has to be the right books. Look on the list that I give in my site. You can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them on Barnes & Noble, but use that list. I picked that list. I've been doing this a long time, many people, and I've seen and I've adjusted this list. So, question for you that you need to answer now to complete this step, okay? Don't forget these. You got to write a simple one here on the page, on the comment. That'll unlock the next ones, and then you need to print out or just take your 67 steps success journal and write this out. So the short question for you to answer is, what's your biggest excuse been for not reading? And what pace are you going to commit to? 1 day, 3 days, once a week? And I want you to commit for the rest of the 67 days that you're here. Just try this experiment for 67 days. Now, do the same thing in your journal, but in your journal where you write out pen and paper, keep it on your bookshelf for years to come. I want you to be more specific. Look through my book list and actually chart out. You can do it on this page too, on this website. Write out the next 3 books you're going to read from my list. Go grab them. Try to do them in order. Don't skip to the number 100th book. Read them, the first 3 or 4, pick one of those, and the next 3 or 4, pick those. You have some choice, but don't get too far off the priority list. So what's the list and what's the pace you're going to do, and why haven't you done this before? It's going to blow your mind, okay? So thanks so much. Be here. Leave the comment. Leave that. Print that out. Book a day. There's a reason that billionaires read books. There's a reason that Alexander the Great read books. There's a reason that Richard Branson read books. It's what Richard Dawkins says. The ability to simulate is going to cut the learning curve by a decade or 20 years or 30 years or even a lifetime. All right? Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.